All right. Well, hello, everybody. We are going to get started. So I would like to introduce Drew Dudley, who is an internationally acclaimed leadership speaker, as well as a Wall Street Journal bestselling author. Called one of the most dynamic speakers in the world, Drew Dudley is on a mission to help people unlearn some dangerous lessons about leadership. As the founder and chief catalyst of Day One Leadership, he has helped top organizations around the world increase their leadership capacity. His clients have included McDonald's, American Express, JP Morgan Chase, the United Way, and more than 100 colleges and universities. Prior to this, Drew spent 8 years as the lead of one of Canada's largest leadership development programs at the University of Toronto. Drew is also the best-selling author of This Is Day One, a practical guide to leadership that matters. It debuted at number 6 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. As a speaker, Drew has delivered keynotes to more than 250,000 people across 5 continents. His TED Talk, Everyday Leadership, The Lollipop Moment, was voted one of the 15 most inspirational TED Talks of all time. Please welcome Drew Dudley.
Thank you so very, very much. Hey, everybody. Greetings from a gray Toronto, Ontario, Canada. We've had 30 hours of sunlight since January 1st. So I'm seeing it pop out behind me. The only problem with that is it's going to completely change the lighting in this studio. So if all of a sudden a giant shadow falls across my face, just know that it also means that some of us here in Canada are getting some much needed vitamin D. I get to talk about leadership cultures today, and I'm fascinated by the concept of culture, because culture is the most powerful controlling force on the planet. Cultural expectations determine what we say, what we do, what we wear, to what we aspire, of what we are ashamed. Because cultural expectations play a bigger role in our lives and our organizations and our communities than rules and policies and procedures. Because rules, policies, and procedures, while we all respect them to some degree, I think we also recognize that as long as you don't violate past a certain level, everybody's going to forgive you, because we all do that to some degree. The difference between that and cultural expectations is that if you violate a cultural expectation, the pushback is swift and universal. It's also very powerful. And as a result, it's much more important in controlling our behavior. If you want to know what I mean, the difference between violating a cultural expectation and violating a rule. If I told you that yesterday I got a speeding ticket, you don't think less of me as a person. But if I show up today to do this thing topless, your opinion of me drops rapidly and precipitously, right? That's despite the fact that speed laws exist because they actually save lives. And the idea that I'm supposed to wear a shirt, let alone a shirt and a tie, we made that up. But you see the difference between what happens if you break one versus you break the other. Cultural expectations are those things that control behavior in your organization, your community, your life, that you actually don't articulate. They simply are there and you know it, and nobody has to say it. But the more decisions in your organization that can be driven by cultural expectations that you had a hand in creating, instead of rules, instead of policies, instead of procedures, the better off you're going to be. So what I want to talk about today is that idea of creating cultures of leadership, empowering people through impact. I want to talk about a process that I call the Day One leadership process. But before we get into that, I want to ask you a question, because I ran the leadership program at the University of Toronto for about a decade. And you can take a guy out of the classroom, but you can't take that urge to ask people questions out of the guy. So I want to start with this. What is your personal leadership philosophy? I just want to reflect on that for a second. And if you're wondering what that means, it's how do you articulate the process that you use to make judgments, decisions? How do you let people know what your personal leadership philosophy is? And I've heard a lot of great ones. I've heard people over profit, which is a common one. I've heard someone say, my kids will find out. We live in a world where whatever I do as a person, my kids are going to find out about it one day. I had someone say that his personal leadership philosophy was no technicalities, because he always said that if you're in a meeting and you're talking about a different way of doing things, or you're arguing over the best route to take, and somebody uses the word technically, you're about to do something shifty. So what is your personal leadership philosophy? How do you make decisions? And a lot of people haven't given it a thought. But the reason that I start by asking that is because it's not just some nice self-reflective exercise. The fact of the matter is it changes how you lead, whether or not you have one of these philosophies. Now, what the research actually shows is that people who can articulate their personal leadership philosophy score 140%, 110% higher on overall leadership effectiveness compared to people that don't. The people who they lead score them 140% more effective as leaders than individuals who aren't seen as having one of these philosophies. Their teams have higher levels of pride, productivity, commitment to the organization. And this is a big one for me. You're 135% more likely to be trusted if you are seen as someone who has a personal leadership philosophy. And when I found out this research, the first thing that occurred to me was that I have absolutely no idea what my personal leadership philosophy is. And obviously, taking the time to develop one is going to benefit me and the people that I work with. And so I started to think to myself, what is it? And the best way I figured it out, if you want to do this too, take out your phone and text someone that you know well, especially if they work with you. And you say, hey, I'm on a seminar right now. And the guy asked, what is my personal leadership philosophy? What would you say it is? Ask someone you know. You are going to learn so much about the way that your decision-making and leadership is perceived by asking other people what they think your philosophy on leadership is. And ultimately, I asked about 10 of my students. And what they told me was something that surprised me. Apparently, every time they'd come into my office to ask about school, about work, about life, I would send them out the door with the exact same phrase every time. I'd say, when you don't know what to do in a situation, you ask yourself, what would the person who I want to be do in this situation? And then do that. And this is great life advice that's incredibly hard to take, because most of us haven't spent a ton of time figuring out who it is we want to be. We all went through an education system that asked us again and again, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? Which basically meant, how do you want to make money? And somewhere along the line, we stopped asking, who is it that we want to be as we accomplish these things? And this is a bigger problem the more high performing you are. Because if you're a high performer early on in your life, people figure out you get stuff done. And once people figure out you get stuff done, they start asking you to do it. And you deliver on these requests and you get rewarded for them. You get more opportunities, you get more money, you get more respect. And eventually this goes on for so long that you're so good at delivering what you're asked that you never actually get a chance to stop and ask yourself, who am I trying to be along the way? And I was one of these people. I was absolutely convinced that I knew the man that I wanted to be. And then an 18-year-old girl messed the whole thing up, which is kind of a theme in my life when you work at a university, because working at a university means you are constantly surrounded by people who are twice as smart as you are. Our job is to graduate them before they figure out they're twice as smart as we are. Otherwise, the entire system collapses. But I was 28 years old the first time that I ever gave a lecture at the University of Toronto. And I was lecturing on leadership theory. And just so you know, theory is the word that you add to interesting things to make them boring. And so I'm going through this textbook, and I realize that I'm talking to a room full of people who don't have any traditional power the way we usually define it. They're 18 years old. They're all freshmen. They live at home with their parents. They have part-time jobs where they've got a boss. Their professors tell them what to do and control their lives because they're so afraid of what happens if you don't please the teachers. And I realized that, why am I talking about management and leadership theory to a group of people who don't feel empowered in the slightest? So I closed the book and I started talking about some of the ideas I'm going to share with you today. And at the end of that class, this young woman comes up and says what every educator wants to hear at the end of your first ever class. She goes, I don't get it. And I said, well, it is kind of a broad concept. Could you be more specific? And she said, I don't understand leadership now. And I said, that's no problem. We have all semester to figure out what leadership means to you. It's why we do the course. And she said, no, I understood leadership before I came to your class. Now I don't understand it. And honestly, that's the whole point of my life now. Like that's 100% what I want to accomplish. I want to send people out the door thinking about leadership differently. But this is my first day at my job, first ever one. And I felt like I let this young woman down. And so I said, what confuses you the most? And we'll start there. And she said, I'm an international student. I didn't grow up here. I'm studying abroad. Where I grew up, we were taught that the smartest people are supposed to be the leaders. And the smartest people are the ones who get the best grades in school. So if you get good grades in school, it's your way of showing the world that one day you deserve to be a leader. And if you don't, it's your way of showing the world that you never deserve that responsibility. But after listening to you, I think leadership means something different in Canadian. And we can talk about whether Canadian is its own language later, eh? But she said, could you explain what leadership means in the simplest English terms possible, please? And I don't know if you've ever been asked a question to which you are certain you have an answer until someone asks you the question. Because I opened my mouth to give what I think both she and I assumed would be a brilliant answer. And I had nothing. Just dust came out. And so I did what educators have been doing for years when we get stumped by a student. You go for the beard for a second. Well, what do you think? And to her enduring credit, she's the only student who ever looked back at me and said, I don't know. That's why I asked you. And so I pulled this one out. Well, why don't you go home and think about it, reflect on it. And what we'll do is we'll open up next class with a discussion. And she looks at me and says, thank you, sir. I'm like, no problem. Because now I get to go home and figure out the answer. And I do joke about that now. But at the time, I was incredibly upset by that because leadership was a value that I wanted to stand for every day of my life. I wanted to stand for it personally and professionally in everything I did. And this woman had asked the most basic question, what does it mean? And I had choked on it. And so I went home that night and I posed myself a hypothetical. And it's one that I want all of you to consider as well. I want you to imagine that someone follows you around for 30 days out of your life, and you have no idea they're following you around. And they see every interaction of which you are a part, public, private, online, and virtual. They see how you interact with people you love, with people you can't stand, and with individuals you've never met before who might be serving you in a grocery store or a restaurant or somebody else, somewhere else. At the end of that 30 days, if I sat that person down and I said to them, based only on the behaviors you saw, the decisions you saw made, the things you heard said, what 3 values drive this person above all others? What 3 values do they stand for and want to leave in their wake, personally and professionally? Which 3 values would they turn and pass on to their children first if they get to choose? What 3 values do you believe that someone would say are embodied by you based on your behaviors and your priorities? And I have asked that question to thousands of people around the world. And what happens is people can give me one very quickly. And it's usually one of the greatest hits. It's integrity, it's kindness, it's honesty. That's usually one of the top 3. I don't know if any of you came up with those. But I want you to think about that first one, whatever the first one that popped into your head was. And I want you to imagine that the young woman from my class walks up to you and she says, English isn't my first language. That word does not directly translate into my language. Could you explain what it means in the simplest English terms possible? And do you mind starting your answer with 3 words? A commitment to. So integrity is a commitment to what? Respect is a commitment to what? Honor is a commitment to what? And for most people, they can give me one quickly. The second one follows a few seconds later. But by the time we try to get to a 3rd value, we haven't dove that deep. And whether or not people can come up with the values or not, most people cannot define what those values mean. They can't actually, we've never articulated these things that are ubiquitous around us that we use to judge ourselves and others. We have trouble defining them. And I went home that night and I posed myself a similar question. I said, imagine there's a room full of people that you highly respect and they're talking about you and you're not there. What words do you hope they use to describe you? And I probably wrote down 30 different words. And this is just a sampling of what I wrote down that night. And you see some of the greatest hits in there. You've got integrity, but these were other things I wanted to stand for: curiosity, passion, leadership, creativity, adventure. But for every one of those words I wrote down, what I did imagine, that young woman from my class walked up to me and said, "I've never heard that word before. Could you explain what it means in the simplest English terms possible?" And like every one of you watching, if you give me 5 minutes with any one of those words, I can give you a remarkable definition. The problem was, I believe I was 27 or 28 years old that night. And it was the first time that I had ever bothered to take the time to define what these words meant to me in terms of behavior. And the big problem there was, I had spent the better part of my adult life evaluating myself as a professional, as a friend, as a human being, based on how well I lived up to those values. And I judged other people. I judged them swiftly and I judged them harshly if I thought that they didn't live up to these values. Like, whether we're aware of it or not, most of the judgments that we make about ourselves and about other people are based on a really fast subconscious calculus. We look at the behavior we just witnessed. We access a list of the values that we believe define a good person and a good leader. And we ask ourselves, did that behavior live up to those values? The challenge is, if we've never defined what those values actually mean, what we're doing is we have inconsistent criteria for making judgments. And when you have inconsistent criteria for making judgments, you don't make consistent, positive judgments along the way. And it's why I tell leaders of all ages, all backgrounds, all industries, we have got to take the time to define the things that you want to define you. Because what I found is, if you want integrity to be a fundamental part of your life and your business, but you don't define what it actually means, if you don't turn it into a finish line so that you know when you hit it, you could be, and look, you probably are, embodying integrity or respect or kindness every day of your life. The problem is, you're never giving yourself permission to celebrate that fact. Like, most of the times where you are being the person and the organization that you want to be, most of those times are passing by unrecognized and uncelebrated by you. And it is the celebrations in our lives and our organizations that drive us forward, that give us momentum, that give us pride, that give us strength. It's the celebrations that do that. And I believe that setting goals is basically planning celebrations. And we set goals for our career, we set goals for our businesses, we set goals for our financial life. My argument is a personal culture of leadership upon which all other organizational cultures have to be built. They're all built on the personal cultures within them. A personal culture of leadership is making sure that you identify the values that you want to live every day and make sure that you are actually doing so. A personal culture of leadership means making sure that you spend just as much time, just as many resources, and just as much energy setting and chasing goals for your daily character and behavior as you do for your organization, for your career, for your financial life. Because what I have found, and I've been really lucky, I get to talk to really successful people. What I have found is that no matter how objectively successful someone is, individuals who have not taken the time to define the things that they want to define them have a lot of trouble answering what not only I believe is a crucial leadership question, but a fundamental human question. Why do you matter? I've asked 1,000 some people that question, sometimes in front of large groups of people, which is terrible because you blank completely. But why do you matter? 95% of the people to whom I pose that question either cannot give me an answer or they're making one up on the spot. And you do matter. If you have kids, go home and ask them that question, because if your kids are under the age of 5, they will melt you with their answers to that question. But something happens to us when we turn 5. We get sent away to school and we stop believing that why we matter is up to us to determine. And it's supposed to be evaluated externally. And because most of us spent 20 of the most formative years of our lives in that system, a lot of us never unlearn that why we matter is supposed to be evaluated externally. And so what happens is we hope to matter, and we hope to lead, and we hope to make a difference. Hope's a powerful force. You should foster hope in your life and the life of everybody that you touch. Hope, however, is a terrible strategy. If your strategy for next quarter is hope, you got a problem. Hope is a terrible strategy. If we want to matter, we want to lead, and we want to make a difference in our organizations and our communities, we've got to plan to matter, plan to lead, and plan to make a difference. How do we go about doing that? That's what I want to share with you. And it starts with a social experiment that I did about 12 years ago at the University of Toronto. I had this brilliant student. We don't have favorite students. We have particularly dynamic students of whom we're particularly fond of working. And one of my particularly dynamic students comes into my office and he just says to me, you know, it's a lot easier to stand up for an ideal than it is to live up to one. And I thought that was genius for a 20-year-old. Turns out he stole it. But I always used to tell my students, in leadership, you never steal an idea. You benchmark a best practice. But he got me thinking about the gap that exists in all of our lives between the person, the leader we want to be, and how we are actually behaving. And look, everybody has that gap. I think most of us don't deny that gap. What we do is we rationalize it as being temporary. Yes, there's a gap between the person I want to be and how I'm behaving, but just until the pandemic is over, just until the wedding, just until the kids are gone, just until retirement. There will always be a just until that makes sure that we continue to let that gap exist. A personal culture of leadership is having a plan every day to close that gap just a little bit, and having the self-respect, the courage, and the forgiveness to know that that gap will never fully close. However, we get up every day and we try a little bit to close it a tiny bit. And that's how what I want to talk about now. So what I did is I gave my students a hypothetical to start this experiment. And think about this for your organization. I said, you get to pick one value and one value only. And whatever value you choose, every single member of this community is guaranteed to do one thing every day that lives up to that value. It will not be the only value up to which they live, but it's the only one you get to guarantee. If you had that kind of power, what value do you choose? And they talked about it, and I expected, one of the greatest hits, but what really surprised me is they came back and they chose one I didn't expect. They chose impact. And so I threw at them, and I do this to you as well. All right, how would you explain what that word means to someone for whom English is not their first language? And they came back and they said, impact is a commitment to creating moments that cause people to feel as if they are better off for having interacted with you. And I said, I love it. Go do it. That's your assignment now, is to go and create those moments. And what I want you to do is, instead of making it a written assignment, which you can fake, every single day of this week, I want you to come into my office. I want you to look me in the eye, and I want you to tell me how you did this. And this was an amazing experiment for like 3 days, because they would come to my office, but before they would walk in, they would pause for a second and I would watch them think. And I realized that what they were doing is looking back over the course of their day, and they were trying to identify a moment where they had actually done this. And because they were awesome kids, they always had one. The problem is that they were using this value that they said was essential to who they wanted to be. They were using it to evaluate behavior that had already happened. And what leaders do is they use their values to drive behavior, to impact decision-making in a moment. Because here's the thing, a value is only a value if you use it as criteria for decision-making. Otherwise, it's just something that looks good on your website or stuck on the wall of the office or put on the bottom of an election sign. They mean nothing. Values are only values if you use them as criteria for decision-making. And if we hadn't thought about impact till the end of the day, that means it wasn't impacting our decision-making during the day, which means it wasn't actually working. So we needed a different approach. Now, beautiful thing about working at a university, somewhere on that campus, there is an expert on everything. And I'll tell you, they cannot wait to tell you all about the thing on which they are an expert. So I headed to the psych department because these people know how to mess with people's minds. And I said, can you tell me how to control the behavior of 20-year-olds? And they laughed their ass off. I said, let me be more specific. We have this behavior in which we hope to engage. We all do. However, school's getting in the way, work's getting in the way, life is getting in the way. We live in the most distracting age of all time. I said, do you have any behavioral psychology tricks, subconscious motivators, that if we add them to our conscious desire to behave a certain way, we're actually more likely to do it? And they said, we can give you 2 behavioral psychology tricks that may help drive behavior. And the first one was the Zeigarnik effect. The Zeigarnik effect is a perfect example of people with PhDs taking something simple and trying to make it sound complex. Because the Zeigarnik effect just says this: things on your to-do list that you have not yet completed take up a more prominent spot in your consciousness than things that you have completed. In other words, stuff you haven't done bugs you till you do it. And I think we all knew that. I just didn't realize that there was a scientific term for it. I also didn't realize the depth of the discomfort that your brain goes through when it's not finished something, but we'll come back to that. The second thing is called the question behavior effect. Now, the question behavior effect says that asking someone a series of questions about a particular behavior is far more likely to get them to engage in that behavior than asking them to do it or telling them to do it. So in other words, if I sat down with any of you over breakfast and we were talking about generosity, and I said, what does generosity mean to you? Who's the most generous person you've ever met? What's the most generous act you've ever seen? Later on in the day, you are way more likely to seek out, seize, or create an opportunity to be generous than if I had asked you to do it or if I had told you that it's a demand that I have. And so if questions can drive human behavior, if unfinished tasks cause this psychic discomfort until they're completed, we decided that what we were going to try to do to close the gap between what we were doing and how we wanted to behave to impact other people every day, what we were going to do is we were going to harness the power of the unanswered question. The human brain hates unanswered questions. It cannot stand them. We think that when we work on a question, we get it right, we get it wrong, or we give up and move on. The thing is, if you give up and move on, only your conscious brain does that. Your subconscious brain basically says, you go ahead and take care of whatever else we need to do. Hammer away at this question, trying to find an answer. And if it can't find an answer, it makes one up and convinces you that it's true. The human brain would rather believe a lie that it itself created than deal with the fact that it does not know the answer to something. And if you think that your brain doesn't work like this, here is what I believe is a universal human experience. At some point, you have tried to remember the name of an actor or an actress, and you can't. And for whatever reason, you just give up and you say, I don't care anymore, I'm going to move on. But then sometime in the next 24 to 48 hours, in the shower, in your car, sitting at your desk, all of a sudden, the name of that actor or actress pops into your head, doesn't it? Ultimately, that is the Zeigarnik effect at work. Your brain couldn't let go of that. And so we said, why don't we create a question that's carefully crafted so that in order to answer the question, you have to do something. And if you do that something, you live the value. To be specific, the first question we ever came up with to try to do this was, for this impact value, what have I done today to recognize someone else's leadership? Leadership is put on a pedestal in our society. And when you say to someone that you see something that society truly values in them, you cannot walk away not having had a positive impact. And so this question cannot be answered without living the value to which it is attached. And so this became the assignment. I said, we're off next week for reading week. So what I'd like to do is the day we come back, we have a 90-minute tutorial. And what I want you to do is I want you to journal how you answer this question every day for the next week. And when we come back on that Monday, we will compare how effective it was compared to just chasing impact. So we tried to chase impact and we forgot. Let's try this question, put it into our brain so that it's an unfinished task, and see if that actually helps us more consistently live impact. Go ahead, I'll see you in a week. That question made me quit my job. because my students just destroyed this assignment. They leaned into it. Their former coaches, their former teachers, their best friends, their parents, the incredibly nice hot dog guy on campus. They just told everybody that you wouldn't expect that they were leading in their lives. The guy who sold hot dogs on our campus was Ted Lasso. I never understood how to explain this man until I saw Ted Lasso, the television series. He was so relentlessly upbeat that when you bought a hot dog, you got a side of joy, whether you wanted it or not. And on Thursday of this assignment, I go up to buy my hot dog. And before he hands it to me, he pulls it back. And he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm buying a hot dog." He goes, "No, 3 of your students have called me a leader this week. What are you doing?" My favorite story that came out of this particular assignment is I had a particularly dynamic student named Aaron. Aaron was a genius. And what he did is he waited at the bus stop for his bus driver from kindergarten to grade 8. And he waits for all the kids to get on the bus, and then he hops on the bus. And the bus driver, because he's good at his job, stops this random 21-year-old from getting on the bus. And he says, "What are you doing?" And Aaron told us that what he told him is, "You probably don't remember me, but I rode your bus for 9 years. And I was incredibly overweight, and I was incredibly smart. And that is a really, really difficult combination with which to go through elementary school." And he said, "I was bullied so badly that every single day before I could go to school, I would have to stand in the front hallway of my house and cry as hard as I could for 30 seconds. Then I could go outside. And I'd wait for your bus, and I'd get on, and I would sit right behind you because the cool kids sit at the back. And you would drive us to school every day. And you would sing Disney songs at the top of your lungs, badly. And the kids in the back were merciless. They mocked everything about you. They mocked that you were singing. They mocked at how bad you were. They mocked at how you dressed, how little money they thought you made, that you were a bus driver. They mocked everything about you, and you heard everything they said. I know you heard it because I heard it. I was sitting right behind you, and you just kept singing. And look, everything in my life was made worse by what those kids said, what they said to me, what they said about me, what they told other people to say about me. And you took everything that they had and you just kept singing. And I got to be honest with you, I don't know how you did it, but I wanted to tell you that every single day for 9 years when I got off this bus, I took a little piece of strength from what you were doing to believe that one day I could do it too. And I go to Harvard for grad school next year. And you, sir, are as big a part of that as any teacher that I have ever had. And I wanted to thank you for your leadership. And there were 12 students and 1 instructor who dedicated themselves to answering the question, what have I done today to recognize someone else's leadership? We dedicated ourselves for 1 week. And at the end of that week, when we got back together for the 90-minute tutorial, it turned into 4.5 hours. Story after story after story about the impact that it had to recognize the impact that other people's had on your life, people who would never see themselves as leaders. We have created a world where most of the leadership on the planet comes from people who do not consider themselves leaders, because we have made leadership about money and power and influence and titles. And ultimately, the leadership that I talk about, the leadership that this process starts to embed, is a type of leadership that involves creating powerful moments of interpersonal impact, moments of compassion, moments of forgiveness, moments of recognition and empowerment. These individual moments, they are leadership and they're powerful. The problem is, not only do we fail to call them powerful, we've actually been taught to loop them into a basket and call them the little things. It's the little things you do every day that make a difference. They're not little. They're the most powerful things that we can do. And it's the only source of power on earth that's accessible to everyone on earth, is the ability to create these powerful moments of interpersonal impact. And that's what my students did. They were going out and recognizing the woman who worked the front counter at the coffee shop, for knowing people's names, for giving them free pastries on the days they had midterms. It was the woman who worked the front desk at financial aid, who saw herself as just the financial aid person. I don't like the word just. People use it all the time to diminish themselves. Every time you hear the word just, it's your opportunity to say to yourself, is that being used as a diminisher? And if it is, it's your chance to recognize someone else's leadership. All of these individuals who would never call themselves leaders were being told that's exactly what they are. And it was having this profound impact. And when the students saw what it did, they did it again and they did it again. And so for a month, we dedicated ourselves to that particular approach. And at the end of the month, something happened I've never seen before or since. My students asked for another test. They wanted another assignment. So we said, all right, let's pick a second value. Let's define it as a commitment. Let's create a question. Now we have 2. Let's try to get 1 out of 2 every single day. And we added a third in the third month and a fourth. By the end of the school year, we had come to create what I've started to call the leadership test. People don't like tests. They really don't. In fact, they hate it so much that I wasn't allowed to name my book this. I wasn't even allowed to reference this in my book, the leadership test. And it's because for the first 20 years of all of our lives, every test we have to write is somebody else's test. They say, these are my questions. You have to deliver me my answers, and how well you deliver my answers is impactful on how your future goes. That's incredibly disempowering. That is wildly stressful, because the only tests that define who you are as a leader and a person are the tests you choose to give yourself. That's what the leadership test is. What we did is we identified 6 core values, and these are the ones I use as examples, but the key is to come up with what yours are: impact, growth, courage, empowerment, class, and self-respect. And for every single one of those, we created one of those action-driving questions, the type that you cannot answer without living the value. For impact, what have I done today to recognize someone else's leadership? What did I do today to make it more likely someone would learn something for growth? What did I try today that might not work, but I tried it anyway? And this is crucial in a world where the school system teaches us mistakes are the worst thing that you can make, so avoid them. The education system doesn't recognize at the end the people who are the most talented, have the most skill, know the most information. What they do is they reward the people who made the fewest mistakes along the way. What did I do today to move someone else closer to a goal for the value of empowerment? When did I elevate instead of escalate today? Class is a commitment to treating people and situations better than they deserve to be treated. And elevating means trying to succeed in a situation. Escalate means trying to win. And there are very few things that stand in the way of organizational success more than the individual need to win. And the foundational question, it's not the last question, it's the one upon which all the others are built: self-respect, a commitment to recognizing that when you are empty, you have nothing to give. What did I do today to be good to myself? 6 fundamental questions there, but it wasn't just about the questions. I wish I could dive more. I have individual presentations on all of those, but one of the big things is it wasn't just about the questions. It was about a fundamental difference in how we set our priorities and how we made decisions. So imagine this, another hypothetical for you. Imagine if every night before you go to bed, you have to prove you deserve another day on this planet. Not at the end of a quarter or a year or a 5-year strategic plan, but every single night you have to prove that you deserve tomorrow. And in order to prove it, you know what they are all day long. If that was our reality, those questions become non-negotiable. They're not things that you do in between picking up the kids or answering emails or going to the meeting. They drive your priorities and your behavior every single day. And because each question is tied to a core value that we wanted to be part of our identity, who we were, what we did by taking this approach is we demanded of ourselves that our to-be list be prioritized at least the same level as our to-do list. And look, I'm not saying your to-do list isn't important. Like, I'd be crazy to say that. We live in a social world. We have to make obligations to one another, and we have to live up to those obligations. But take a look at your life. If every obligation that you have in a given day is an obligation to someone else, that is a life of obligation. That's disempowering and unsustainable. If you can carve out 10% of your obligations in a given day and make them obligations to yourself, and that's what these questions represent, 10% of my obligations every day, and they're to me, that leaves 90% for the rest of the world. And that is a life of service. And a life of service is sustainable and it's empowering. 6 questions 2 of them designed to add value to other people, 2 of them that can add value to yourself, 2 of them that can go either way. If you aced this test every day for a year, you would add over 2,000 conscious pieces of value, 2,000 moments of leadership every single year. And high school me can't believe I'm about to say this, but you don't have to ace the test. You just have to pass it. If you get 3 questions out of 6, do you know that's over 1,000 moments of leadership? 1,000 times when you are actually living up to the values you claim to stand for. 1,000 pieces of evidence that you matter. That's the big piece to me. 1,000 pieces of evidence that you matter. Because I believe the scariest time in our lives is the time between closing our eyes and falling asleep. Because all we have in that time is us being honest with ourselves, the way things that we haven't done right, the things that we failed at, the things that we came up short when we wanted to be something more. They live with us every night between closing our eyes and falling asleep, which is why so many of us fall asleep looking at a television or a phone or a tablet, because it means we don't have to live through that. But by being able every day to engage in things that prove that you matter, creating these individual moments of interpersonal impact, by doing that, it makes that period so much less scary, because what you can think of in those moments is how you matter, how you impacted, and how you can do it again. And all this is hard. It's a process. And I love hard processes. I run a company called Day One Leadership because there's something fundamentally different about day one of anything. On the first day of any difficult mission, there's an inherent humility, commitment, and forgiveness. And that changes the way that you act on a given day. And I've had so many day ones in my life. I had day one of leaving the university and starting my own business. I had day one of going from a man who was 330 pounds to someone who was 100 pounds lighter. I had day one of no longer hiding the fact that I'm bipolar. Like for years, I hid that fact because we still live in a world that equates mental illness with mental weakness. But I watched so many of my students deal with their own struggles, and I realized that they were feeling the same things I was. They felt that being open about this would make them look weak. It would make them an embarrassment to the people who love them, and it would make them unemployable. And I realized I was staying quiet for the same reasons. But I made a deal with one of my students that they would get treatment if I was willing to talk about the fact that this was a part of my life as well. And I kept that commitment. And I was so afraid that it was going to destroy my career, because we're taught from a young age, if you want to impress people, you got to make them look at you and say, oh my God, I can't do that. But what I've discovered is that if you really want to give people a gift, it's not to let them look at you and say, oh, wow, I can't do that, I'm inspired. It's to let them look at you and say, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. I thought I was the only one afraid of that. I thought I was the only one hiding that. I thought I was the only one hurt by that. Whatever thing you're hiding because you think it makes you look weak or unemployable or an embarrassment, just know that the energy you're putting into playing the character that isn't true about, that character who's just fine, the energy you put into playing that character is making you a worse boss. It's making you a worse employee. It's making you a worse partner. It's making you a worse parent. Because the energy we put into playing a character could go into all of those things that we truly want to define us. Don't hide. When you step up, you give other people permission to step up, stand next to you and say, I thought I was the only one. And I had day one of living that life. And I had day one of a life without alcohol. I am powerless over alcohol. Step one. But one of the things I learned in recovery is if you don't want to have a drink for the rest of your life, you have to make the very difficult decision to not have a drink today. And that is the only decision you worry about, not having a drink today. You don't worry about whether you had one yesterday. You don't worry about whether you'll have one tomorrow. The only thing that matters is whether or not you stay true to that non-negotiable behavior today. And then you treat every day of the rest of your life as if it is your first day of recovery. Because what that means is you do not rest on your laurels of what you have accomplished before. 3,112 days does not matter if you don't make the decision today. But it also means you don't get overwhelmed by how much you still have to do. Like I fight an addiction every day, and I hope I have thousands more days in my life. The thought of having that fight thousands of more times is enough to make you not want to do it now. But what I found is that when we focus on the idea that this is day one of your mental health journey, your physical health journey, your leadership journey, what happens is we can stay committed to those simple but powerful actions that keep us moving forward in our leadership. Simple does not mean little when it comes to leadership. Day one is the day you identify the non-negotiable behaviors that are going to be a part of every day of the rest of your life. It involves saying, these are my values, here's what they mean, and here is the question I answer every single day to make sure that those individual things that build momentum are happening every day, because 5-year momentum is way more important than 5-year plans. I really and truly believe that. Make your decisions based not on what plans are, but what builds the most momentum. Because leadership, we've been taught from a young age, is in these big moments, these big things. Leadership is not in the big stuff. Leadership is in the consistent stuff. And ordinary acts done with extraordinary consistency change worlds. And the stats say that if you help the people who work for you identify their own values and live them every day, that is so much more impactful than telling them, these are the corporate values. These are the values we need you to live up to because it's what we stand for. If they understand both, amazing. But the statistics say that the great untapped resource for bosses, managers, owners all over the world is they do not help their employees identify their own behaviors and let them feel like they're living them every single day. Because when you do things consistently, consciously, they become unconscious. And it's in your unconscious behaviors, those habits you form, that legacy gets built. So if we're conscious about our daily behaviors of leadership, we're more likely to engage in them without thinking. And it's in those moments where you accidentally start to create powerful moments that change people's lives and change organizations. I didn't used to think like that. I used to think that leadership was this little club that not everyone can or should get into. Because if everyone can be a leader, isn't that insulting to all the work I put in? Like, I worked really hard to go to the best schools and get the best grades and work 50, 60, 70 hours a week so that I could prove that I deserved those titles and that respect and those responsibilities. And if everyone can be a leader, it completely undermines how hard I worked. And I hated that idea. And a lot of things changed that over the years. But I'm going to close with a story that opened my eyes to where legacy really gets built. And I was at my first university for, I think, 7 years because I was taught that letters after your name make you smarter. And so I tried to collect them. And on my last night there, a young woman came up to me and she said, I remember the first time that I ever met you. And she told me a story that had happened 3.5 years earlier. And she said, 3.5 years ago on my first day, I was standing in line to register. And I was so overwhelmed by the noise. I was so overwhelmed by the self-doubt that I wasn't ready for this, that standing in line on my first day, I just quit. And as soon as I decided to quit, I was overcome by this extraordinary feeling of peace. And I turned to my mom and my dad to say, you have to take me home. I can't do this. And before I could say it, you came out of the nearest building wearing the stupidest hat I've ever seen in my life. And a big sign that said students fighting cystic fibrosis was around your neck, and you were carrying a bucket full of lollipops. And you started moving along this lineup of first-year students and their parents, and you're handing out these lollipops, trying to make us laugh, trying to convince us to get up early on a Saturday and do a charity campaign. And all of a sudden you get to me and you stop, and you just stared at me. And then you look at the guy next to me and you smile, and you hold out a lollipop, and you say, dude, you have to stand next to this incredibly beautiful woman for the next 2.5 hours in line. And you're not even breaking the ice. You should give her a lollipop, man. Give her a lollipop. And she goes, I've never seen the guy before in my life, but I've never seen anyone get so embarrassed so quick. He turns this deep shade of crimson. He won't even look at me. He just does this with the lollipop. And I feel so bad for him that I take it from him. But as soon as I take the lollipop, your entire demeanor changes and you look so upset. And you turn to my parents and you go, look at your little girl. Look at your daughter. First day away from home. First day without mom and dad to hold her hand. And already she is taking candy from a stranger. Nice parenting. And she goes, everybody starts to laugh for about 20 feet in every direction. I don't know why, it sounds cheesy, but when the laughter started, something inside of me changed. And I said, okay, don't quit today. You can quit tomorrow. And then the next day, someone did something and I put it off one more day and then another. And by the end of the week, I wasn't thinking about quitting anymore. And I haven't talked to you once in the 3.5 years since that happened, but I heard that you were leaving. And before that happened, I had to come up and tell you, I graduate at the end of this year, and you have been an incredibly important person in my life, and I will miss you. So good luck, okay? And she walks off. Don't do that. Like, don't say to someone, you've been an incredibly important person in my life, and then just wander away. And I think she realized that because she turns around, she comes back, and she says, there is one more thing you should probably know. I've been dating that dude for 3.5 years since you introduced us this morning, that morning. And a year and a half later, after I moved from Sackville, New Brunswick to Toronto to start my career, the two of them invited me to their wedding. Like, she married the dude. And here's the thing that drives my work. I don't remember that. I have no recollection of that moment. And I searched my memory for that moment because I was funny in that moment. I'd like to remember it, but I don't remember that. And that drives so much of the work that I do around leadership, that maybe the biggest moment of leadership in my life, maybe the biggest impact on another human being I ever had, a moment that had a girl walk up to a stranger 4 years later and say, you have been an incredibly important part of my life. It is a moment that I don't even remember. Like, we have been taught from a young age, achieve things and acquire things so that people look at you like you're a leader, so that you feel yourself that you are a leader, that I think we've lost sight of an essential truth. The primary determinant of how other people view us, and more importantly, how we view ourselves, is how we actually behave on a day-to-day basis. But we've been taught leadership is about changing the world. And for what it's worth, there is no world. There's just 9 billion understandings of it. And that means that every time you change one person's understanding of the world, one person's understanding what they're capable of, one person's understanding of how many people care about them, one person's understanding of how powerful an agent for change they can be in this world, and more importantly, how powerful an agent for change they can be in their own lives. Every time you change one person's understanding of the world, you change the whole world. And that's not beneath any of us. It's not beyond any of us. I want to redefine leadership. I want to make it about lollipop moments. How many we create, how many we pay forward, and how many we empower other people to create for themselves. Because I think all of us have a lollipop moment, a moment where somebody said or did something that made us realize that we had an impact in this world. Everybody's got one of those. But how many times have we told the person who created it how much it meant to us? And that I don't get, because we live in a world where we celebrate birthdays, where all you have to do is not die for 365 days and you get a cake. But we let people walk around who have made our lives, our organizations, and our communities better, and we don't tell them that, and we don't use the term leadership. I think it's time to start changing that. Because honestly, if we start to look at leadership like that, celebrate leadership like that, if we teach leadership like that to the next generation, I think we can change everything. And that is a simple idea, but it doesn't mean that it's a small one. And I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to share those ideas with you today. Thank you so much for your attention. I know it's the only thing that you can't get back. My absolute pleasure being here. Stay positive, test negative. Thanks, my friends.
Wow, that was incredible. So I want to thank you so much for doing that for us. I will be sending out, I saw your text thing come up. And
Yes.
so I did that. And then I will send out the slides I downloaded for it. And then there'll be a recording that'll be there. But I know people in the chat were very much appreciative and thought it was fantastic. And someone already said they ordered your book. So
Oh, really? Well, thank you so very much.
So no. So thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining in, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Take care, everyone. Be safe.